The fallout from Charlie Kirk's sudden and shocking death has shaken the foundations of American politics. Across the country, emotions are raw, divisions are sharper than ever, and the fight over what comes next has already begun. Vigils and tributes poured in from supporters, but so too did anger, accusations, and demands for action. For many conservatives, Kirk's death was not just a tragedy. It was proof that words have power, that rhetoric can inflame, and that America needed stronger boundaries on speech. For others, it was the beginning of a dangerous slide towards censorship and authoritarian control. Into this storm stepped two figures whose clash would become headline news. On one side, Donald Trump, standing as the voice of a movement determined to turn grief into political strength. In rallies, interviews, and press statements, he framed Kirk as a martyr and declared, "We will not allow dangerous hate to go unchecked any longer. If people think they can mock, attack, or disrespect patriots like Kirk, they are wrong. There will be consequences." His words were met with thunderous applause by his supporters. On the other side stood Congresswoman Jasmine Crockett, one of the most outspoken defenders of free speech in Washington. With her sharp wit, cutting rhetoric, and unshakable conviction, she refused to let Kirk's death become a weapon against liberty. In a fiery response outside the Capitol, she declared, "Respecting Kirk's memory should not mean dismantling the First Amendment. Today you censor speech you dislike. Tomorrow you censor dissent, and the day after that you censor truth itself." The clash was electric. Trump versus Crockett, honor versus liberty, grief versus principle. Images of candlelit vigils for Kirk played side by side with clips of angry protests over censorship. Social media became the battlefield. Hashtags like #FreeSpeechOnTrial, #KirkFallout, and #CrockettV Trump trended as millions of Americans debated which side they were on. For many, this was not just politics, it was personal. Workers were being suspended for comments made online, students disciplined for memes, and media figures pulled off air for controversial remarks. Each story became ammunition in the larger battle. Was this accountability, or was this suppression? One thing was clear, the stakes had never been higher. Kirk's death was no longer just a tragedy, it was a spark that set fire to America's deepest divides. And at the center of that fire, Jasmine Crockett and Donald Trump were preparing to go head-to-head in a showdown that would decide whether free speech itself could survive the storm. The storm only grew louder as days passed. Vigils gave way to protests, and protests turned into political theater. In offices and classrooms, people whispered about colleagues suspended for posting the wrong comments about Kirk. On social media, accounts disappeared overnight, banned for what platforms called incendiary rhetoric. For Trump and his allies, these incidents became proof of what they had been warning about for years. America was being poisoned by unrestrained speech. At a rally in Florida, Trump's words cut like thunder through the night air. Standing at the podium, red tie gleaming under the lights, he declared, "We cannot allow disrespect to patriots like Charlie Kirk. We cannot let the hate and the lies continue to destroy this country. When people attack the dead, they attack America itself. And I promise you, under my watch, there will be accountability." The crowd erupted, chanting his name. For his supporters, this was more than politics. It was a moral crusade. But Jasmine Crockett was not silent. The very next day, outside the Capitol, she struck back with fire of her own. Cameras pressed in as she leaned into the microphone, her voice sharp and unflinching. Donald Trump says he wants accountability. What he really wants is control. He is using Kirk's death as a shield to attack the First Amendment. Free speech is not negotiable. It is the bedrock of our democracy. You don't protect America by silencing Americans. Her words ricocheted across the media. Clips went viral, garnering millions of views in hours. Supporters hailed her as fearless, finally someone willing to confront Trump's narrative head-on. Critics, however, blasted her as insensitive, accusing her of disrespecting Kirk's memory. Commentators sparred on television. Was Crockett defending freedom, or was she exploiting tragedy? Trump doubled down, posting online, "Crockett doesn't care about the safety of Americans. She doesn't care about respect for the dead. All she cares about is chaos. Sad." His message was retweeted tens of thousands of times, fueling outrage among his base. Crockett responded with equal force. "If speaking the truth makes me the villain, so be it. I would rather be called disrespectful than allow one man to tear apart our democracy." The divide was stark. Trump casting himself as the defender of honor and safety. Crockett refusing to yield as the guardian of liberty. America was split in two, and the fault line was only growing wider. The battle reached Washington, and the halls of Congress became the stage for one of the most explosive debates in recent memory. Committees scheduled hearings, journalists swarmed the Capitol steps, and every network cut to live coverage. The nation was bracing for what everyone knew would be a collision: Donald Trump versus Jasmine Crockett. Trump entered first, carrying a stack of papers like evidence. He stood tall, jaw set, eyes scanning the room with the confidence of a man who knew he owned the spotlight. He spoke with authority. "We are here because dangerous rhetoric has gone unchecked. Charlie Kirk is dead because words have consequences. If we do not set boundaries, then more Americans will fall victim to the poison of hate speech. This is not censorship. This is protection." Applause roared from his allies. He raised the papers high, waving screenshots of social media posts. "Look at this garbage. Disgusting memes. Hate, disrespect. And people call this freedom? I call it poison." The camera turned to Jasmine Crockett. She leaned into her microphone, voice sharp and deliberate. "Mr. Trump, what you call protection is nothing more than control. You don't get to decide what Americans can say. You don't get to silence people in the name of patriotism. Charlie Kirk's death is a tragedy, but you are exploiting it. Today you hold up memes as evidence. Tomorrow you will hold up dissent itself. And that is when democracy dies." Gasps filled the chamber. Some lawmakers clapped, others shouted in protest. The moderator struggled to restore order, but the confrontation had already spiraled. Trump jabbed a finger across the table. "You call it exploitation. I call it saving lives. Your so-called defense of freedom is reckless, and it dishonors Kirk's memory." Crockett didn't flinch. Her reply rang like steel. "You cannot build a safer America on the grave of free speech. Once you declare words to be crimes, you hand politicians, yourself included, the power to erase truth itself." Chaos erupted. Lawmakers shouted, journalists scrambled to record every second, and within minutes the clips hit social media. Hashtags exploded. #Crockett vs. Trump. #Free Speech Battle. #Kirk Fallout. For those watching at home, it felt like more than a hearing. It felt like history. Two voices, two visions of America, clashing in real time. Neither was backing down, and the nation knew this was only the beginning. The confrontation in Congress was only the spark. Within days, networks announced a primetime town hall. Donald Trump and Jasmine Crockett, face to face, lived before the nation. The auditorium filled to capacity, the air electric with tension. On one side, Trump's supporters waved flags and wore red caps. On the other, free speech advocates held blank white signs, a symbol of voices being silenced. Millions tuned in at home, hashtags already trending. #Trump vs. Crockett, #Free Speech on trial, #Kirk Fallout. Trump struck first, standing behind his podium, shoulders square, his voice carried like thunder. "How many more tragedies do we need? How many more Charlie Kirks? America cannot survive if hatred is allowed to run wild. Free speech has limits. It always has. You can't yell fire in a crowded theater, and you shouldn't be able to weaponize words to incite violence. This is about respect. This is about protecting America." Applause shook the hall. Supporters rose to their feet, roaring their approval. For a moment, the momentum was his. Then Jasmine Crockett leaned into her microphone. Her expression was unyielding, her tone slicing through the noise. "Mr. Trump, the problem isn't fire in a theater. The problem is politicians like you deciding what counts as fire. Today you silence people in the name of safety, tomorrow in the name of loyalty, and the day after that simply because you can. That is not protection. That is tyranny." Gasps swept the room. Phones lit up as viewers captured the moment in real time. Clips flooded TikTok, Twitter, and YouTube. The moderators urged order, but the crowd had already chosen sides, half erupting in cheers, half in jeers. Trump raised his hand for silence, his voice rising. Crockett doesn't care about safety. She doesn't care about respect. Her so-called freedom means more dead Americans, more grieving families, more chaos, and that is unacceptable. Crockett fired back instantly. "No, Mr. Trump, what I care about is truth. What I care about is liberty. When you silence voices, you don't stop anger, you multiply it. When you bury words, you bury truth. And when truth dies, democracy dies with it." The auditorium erupted into chaos. Supporters screamed, protesters chanted, moderators shouted for control. Viewers at home leaned closer to their screens, knowing they were witnessing a turning point. This was no debate. It was a battle for the future of the First Amendment, fought in front of the entire nation, and neither side was ready to surrender. The fallout from the town hall was immediate and seismic. News outlets replayed the fiery exchanges on a constant loop, framing them as nothing less than a war over America's soul. Clips of Jasmine Crockett's thunderous rebuttal to Trump spread across social media like wildfire. Some hailed her as a fearless defender of liberty. Others condemned her as reckless, accusing her of disrespecting Kirk's memory. But the conflict was no longer confined to politics. It bled into daily life. In offices across the country, workers were suspended after their online comments went viral. A teacher in Ohio was placed on leave for telling students that free speech mattered more than hurt feelings. In Texas, a college student faced expulsion for posting memes about Kirk. Each case ignited protests, news debates, and furious arguments in living rooms and classrooms. Trump seized the moment to hammer his message. At a rally, his voice was filled with conviction. This is exactly what I've been saying. People think they can say whatever they want, whenever they want, with no consequences. That ends now. We will restore respect, we will restore safety, and we will honor Charlie Kirk by making sure his sacrifice was not in vain. His supporters roared, waving flags, chanting his name. Crockett refused to yield. On national television, her voice was steady, her words sharp. This isn't about Kirk anymore. This is about control. Donald Trump is using grief as a weapon. He is using tragedy as a tool, and every time he tells you that speech is dangerous, what he's really saying is that truth is dangerous. That is the real threat to America. Her words struck a nerve. Protesters poured into city streets carrying blank signs to symbolize silenced voices. Hashtags like #censorship kills and #speak free or else surged into trending charts. The battle lines hardened and the rhetoric grew hotter by the hour. Commentators warned of a cultural civil war. On one screen, candlelight vigils for Kirk flickered. On another, fiery clashes between free speech activists and counter-protesters dominated headlines. International leaders weighed in. Allies expressed concern. Rivals mocked the United States, saying the so-called land of the free was now questioning whether freedom itself could survive. The image of America was fracturing before the world's eyes. And at the center of it all, Trump and Crockett stood as avatars of two opposing visions: order through control or liberty through chaos. The country was no longer just debating Charlie Kirk, it was debating itself, and silence was no longer neutral, it was a weapon. The nation held its breath as the clash between Donald Trump and Jasmine Crockett reached its climax. Networks branded it the showdown over free speech. Clips of their words replayed endlessly, Trump demanding boundaries, Crockett defying him, and the chaos of a divided country. The final confrontation would take place in a nationally televised session, one that promised to either heal the divide or shatter it completely. Trump stepped forward first. His voice was steady, his gaze firm. We cannot afford to let chaos rule this nation. Words have power. When they disrespect heroes like Charlie Kirk, they endanger us all. We need rules. We need order. Without boundaries, America falls apart. Applause erupted from his supporters. For them, his words carried the weight of salvation. Then came Jasmine Crockett. She walked to the podium in her sharp blue blazer, her voice rising with conviction. Donald Trump says freedom is chaos, but I say freedom is America. You don't protect democracy by silencing it. You don't save lives by burying truth. When we punish words instead of answering them, we lose more than liberty. We lose ourselves. Gasps swept the room. Half the audience cheered wildly, the other half jeered with equal passion. Phones recorded every word, flooding social media in real time. Hashtags exploded. Hashtag Crockett vs. Trump. Hashtag free speech on trial. Hashtag Kirk fallout. Trump pointed a finger across the stage. She doesn't understand. Without control, there is no respect. Without respect, this country cannot survive. Crockett shot back instantly, her tone like a blade. No, Mr. Trump, respect is earned through truth, not forced through fear. The America you're describing isn't strong, it's shackled. The hall erupted into chaos. Moderators shouted for silence, but the audience was split down the middle, chanting, cheering, and booing. For millions watching at home, it was more than a debate. It was a reckoning. Images flashed across screens. Candlelight vigils for Kirk, fiery rallies led by Trump, protests led by Crockett with chants of free speech forever. Families sat at home divided, arguing about what freedom should mean. The world watched, wondering whether America could survive its own contradictions. And then, over the final montage, the voice rang clear. Charlie Kirk's death lit the match. Donald Trump fanned the flames with his call for order. Jasmine Crockett struck back with fire of her own. And now the question is no longer theirs, it is ours. What kind of nation will America choose to be? The music swelled, the screen faded to black, a single line appeared. Jasmine Crockett silences Trump with brutal free speech takedown after Kirk fallout. And the final call. If you believe in freedom, if you believe your voice matters, don't stay silent. Subscribe, share this video, and leave a comment below. Because the fight for speech, for truth, and for democracy itself begins with us.